Good evening and welcome to the latest interview in ACS's Industry Insights Leaders series, featuring Australian tech professionals who share their expertise on how technology and innovation transforms and shapes our economy. My name is Daniel Rayhanna, Chief Operations Officer of the ACS, and I'll be your host this evening. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the lands on which we meet today and to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Tonight our guest is Michaela Jade, CEO and founder of InDigital. InDigital works to develop innovative new ways to digitise and translate knowledge and culture from remote and ancient communities. Michaela has a background in environmental biology and has spent most of her career as a National Park Ranger. She developed her signature app, InDigital Storytelling, in remote Kakadu, Northern Territory. It uses drones, 4D mapping software, image recognition technology, and cultural lore to bring the world's cultural sites alive through augmented and mixed reality. Welcome, Michaela, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Daniel.
No problem. So, take us through it. You started out as a park ranger, establishing Australia's first Indigenous edutech company. Take us through that journey and what it's entailed.
Yeah, so the journey has been a really long one for me. It started actually when I was a kid and I was really connected to the bush where I grew up, but I didn't actually know about my cultural heritage until I was 18 and didn't have it confirmed until I was 29. So I became a park ranger because I felt very connected to our lands where I grew up, which incidentally became my own country as a Cabrogal Darug speaking woman. So I was a park ranger. I had the absolute privilege of working in Kakadu, the Great Barrier Reef, Ningaloo Reef, the Pilbara region of Australia, and later on in Canberra. So I've worked all around the country. During that time, I was responsible for managing visitors on National Park Estate and became obsessed about visitors having a fantastic visitor experience, but also minimising their impact on cultural heritage. And the idea of using augmented and mixed reality to share cultural stories on country came to me in 2013 when I first saw AR. So no tech skills and just decided that I would find everything I could out about this technology and try and bring it to life.
Thanks. So take us through some of those steps there. So no tech background.
Yeah.
Where did you start, and over that journey, obviously being located in the Northern Territory, how did you end up landing in the ACT?
Yeah. So how to get to the ACT? I started my company in Kakadu and we worked up there for a couple of years, and a lot of changes were happening in Jabiru where we were living, including schooling arrangements for kids. And I have two daughters. So I have a 15-year-old daughter, Amy, and an 11-year-old daughter, Jasmine. And they weren't able to participate in School of the Air education. So we actually moved to Canberra so the kids could finish school in a more suitable schooling environment for them. And was lucky enough to start working with ACT Parks and Conservation Service here.
Thanks. And so how did you start developing your idea into, from concept into minimum viable product?
Yeah, so that was a really long journey as well. I probably took a little longer than most people to do this because I didn't have a tech background. I had the idea and I pitched it to an innovation group and got a very small amount of seed funding to research this idea. Back in 2013, you can probably imagine how archaic augmented reality was at the time and how few people worked in it. And I couldn't actually find anyone in Australia who wanted to work with me. I had such a small amount of money. I had the worst pitch in the world. So I basically would cold call augmented reality companies and say, hi, I'm an Aboriginal woman from Australia. I would like to make augmented reality with Indigenous content in areas that don't have internet connectivity. So you can imagine how many people kind of hung up the phone with that conversation. But one person said yes, they would work with me, and he was in Biggleswade in the UK. So I would go to work as a park ranger in Kakadu during the day, and then I would get on Skype at 11 o'clock at night, and he would teach me what he calls the dark arts of augmented reality production. So that's kind of how I learnt, and that's how we got to developing the minimum viable product. Was just really trial and error with different technologies. I ended up working in really very large cultural sites. So we did use photogrammetry in the beginning, but to do that in a very, very large rock art setting in Kakadu, I had to learn to fly a drone. So self-taught myself that and taught myself some of the software for putting these large cultural sites together, and then was able to become a commercial pilot to do that work. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Thank you. So, so how did you convince Indigenous communities to get on board with the concept of using augmented reality to tell their stories, and what challenges and opportunities did that present?
Yeah, so I don't think I had to convince anyone. People obviously hadn't seen the tech when I went to Kakadu, and the way that I harnessed the support of the community was to go to the local arts centre, the cultural centre, and I hadn't obviously had an app developed by then, so I used an architectural app that I found on the internet and printed off the plan and just put it on the table in the arts centre. And then everyone was like, oh, that's really interesting. What is it? And I got them to pick up the phone and use the app, and it popped up with a three-dimensional architectural house, and they could see all around it, and they could see like what the house would look like in like nighttime and daytime. And that's when the ideas sparked for the community. So we had 5 traditional owners who worked with us on the project in Kakadu, and they were absolutely incredible people to work with. Them having the concept and ideas of what they wanted to do with the tech was what got me really excited about it. So I certainly wasn't pushing an agenda. I just saw myself as someone who had an idea of maybe what we could do with this, and who could work as a project manager to bring it to life, I guess.
Thank you. And obviously working with augmented and mixed reality can be costly. How did you arrive at the right balance of affordability as you were sort of building that app and when designing your MVP to get it to a stage where you could go out and prosecute your message and take it further?
Yeah, yes, that's a great question. So as I mentioned, I was a park ranger. Park rangers don't earn very much. So I had to take out an enormous business loan to be able to develop my first MVP. As people kind of put house deposits down with that size of loan, and I was saying to my partner, I think we should invest in this technology. So it was very brave of him to believe in me, and we took out the business loan and developed our first MVP using developers offshore. 2 reasons for that. I couldn't find anyone who wanted to work with us in Australia. The concept was probably a bit far-fetched for most people to start thinking about AR and Indigenous and female and remote communities. So I didn't get a lot of support in Australia, and I met a company in New Orleans actually who ended up having a head office in India, and we worked together for 2 years to develop the MVP. Yeah.
Thank you. What role can technology play in empowering the First Nations people, do you think?
Lots. So I guess everyone on this chat tonight probably knows that digital is everywhere and involved in almost every career now. So I think the real gift that comes with working with our people in technology, and particularly technology futures, is we have 80,000 years of science and knowledge, particularly around land management, climate change adaptation, education. We have incredible skills and insights and experience in all of these sectors, and to be able to have the opportunity and to create the space for First Peoples to step into the development of new technologies is like incredibly exciting. And I think we have so much to offer in that space, not just being consumers of technology products, but actually helping to shape them.
Thanks, Michaela. Can you tell us sort of where the business is now to sort of, where it originally started from under that project?
Yeah, so I did develop the first augmented reality storytelling application in 2014. We ran that through until last year. But the problems with it were it wasn't scalable, it wasn't repeatable, it was incredibly expensive to put content in. So it was costing us about $8,000 a piece to put a 90-second story in. And who wants to take the financial risk of that all the time? I couldn't afford to do it. So we ended up working with Microsoft and Telstra Purple to completely redesign and reshape how we could do a workflow that was scalable and repeatable and was affordable for every Australian to be able to participate in producing this kind of content. So we turned to platforms. We worked with Telstra, Purple and Microsoft to develop an augmented reality production platform that allows Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and all peoples really to create three-dimensional characters, do some basic animation to those characters, work in Minecraft to create landscapes, and then do audio recordings that involve Indigenous language and language preservation techniques, which our platform takes all those assets and then pushes it into an AR experience through our application. And also because getting people from very little tech skill to producing AR content is quite a leap, we support people through a Microsoft community training platform, which allows people to do this workflow step by step with lots of resources and support videos and things.
Thank you. So that does sound like a pretty big pivot.
Yeah.
From going from educating people about cultural sites through to now more general education. Who's your main customer base today?
Yeah, so we've got two parts to the business. Our main customer base for in digital schools is schools and education settings like galleries, libraries, museums, and schools. So we work with a curriculum that we've designed to train trainers how to teach kids how to do this. And the other side of our business is still in that cutting edge space. So we do a lot of experimental work with digital twins and also embedding machine learning into holograms. We've got a piece in the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney at the moment where my uncle created a physical traditional message stick. And we worked with Brett Levy and Telstra and Microsoft to make my aunties into a 3D holographic format where we embedded our own Darug language into those holograms. So users can ask questions of my digital aunties and they can respond in Darug and English.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So let's just shift a little bit. What responsibility does one have as a social licence to operate in Indigenous communities? How can we ethically and respectfully represent the culture of First Peoples in the digital age?
Yeah, there's a huge body of work that is being done in this space. We've been advocating for Indigenous digital rights at the UN level since 2014. So it's really difficult because a lot of laws and policies and social license to operate revolves around individual ownership of intellectual property and copyright, for example, whereas working with communities, we have collective ownership and multi-generational ownership, in fact. So Terry Jenke and company have done a lot of groundbreaking work in this area, and she has put together a system called True Tracks, which we deploy in our company as well. And we worked with Terry early on in 2012 when I first got my hands on Google Glass. And I remember walking into her office and saying, okay, what do we do with this, Auntie? Because we're going to be putting culture in here and there's no pathway to respectfully do this yet. So things, obviously respect is a huge thing. Self-determination is a huge thing. I mentioned before that I didn't solicit people to be involved in this. It has to come from the community themselves. And if people don't have enough skills to do that, obviously they want to partner with people that do have skills, but still self-determination is a really important aspect of working with our peoples in any tech. Consent and consultation is really important. And part of that is free, prior and informed consent and making sure that when we're working with communities, they understand also what's under the hood. And this became really important to me this year when I'm doing a Masters of Applied Cybernetics at 3AI at the moment, and we had to do a Python project, and I wanted to do a direct dictionary where we could teach our language just through a basic program using Python. And I realized that we should actually be asking our elders to approve the code of these programs as well, not just the concept. So we've been going through that process with the Darug Tribe or Aboriginal Corporation, looking at how do we upskill our elders to be able to get them to even provide consent and consultation on the code behind all these programs. Then there's cultural integrity. So that comes with self-determination. Communities will tell you about cultural integrity and how to present our culture's language and law. Secrecy and privacy is a huge challenge in the space. So I have had communities ask me to work with them on sacred content, and I won't do that for the moment because I don't believe that we've got enough security arrangements around data to do that. Attribution, so we always make sure that we attribute the collaborators and contributors to the program and that they get benefit sharing in the work that we do as well. And I guess recognition and protection, recognition that our cultures have as much right as everybody else's to evolve in the digital space, and we shouldn't be looking at our cultures as something that happened in the past only and that we have to keep in some kind of time capsule, but recognizing that we're the most innovative communities in the world, like we're the oldest living cultures, and we want to continue that cultural expression in different methods, and that includes technology.
Thank you very much. Michaela, could you just take us through the type of company and type of values you are as well, and sort of why that's important to you?
Yeah, so we are a for-profit, for-purpose organisation. So we don't fit neatly in a lot of categories, like investment categories is pretty hard for us because we benefit share with traditional owners and communities. Our values are collaboration and reconciliation. So we work across cultures, not just Indigenous cultures, because there's like 300 different Indigenous cultures in Australia, but also between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. Obviously, working to give people confidence is another value. So communities can look at the technology that we work in and be confronted by it. And particularly young people, we're finding are like, oh, technology, that's a bit for old people, or it's a bit daggy. So trying to shift perceptions about technology futures and also give them confidence to try and to fail and then to succeed in the technology. Because we all know in tech, there's a lot of problem solving that needs to happen, a lot of frustration. So, you know, in providing people the opportunity to express failure and then get to something like an MVP is really exciting. So,
Thank you. And your networks obviously go global too, and you're involved in some organisations on the international stage. Can you share some examples of other countries that have been successful in this area in terms of their Indigenous digital futures, and what learnings have you been able to apply here in Australia, or could we apply here in Australia?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Māori community in New Zealand have really strong networks around data sovereignty and data governance. So we have a lot to learn from our brothers and sisters over in New Zealand. And we have Digital has a really strong connection with the Digital Natives Academy in Rotorua. So we do a lot of cultural and just sharing about what we're doing and supporting each other. Canada is another country that is forging ahead on being leaders in expressing culture through gaming. That's really huge in Canada, and also in three-dimensional filming and other expressions of culture. Communities in Africa are forging ahead. I think everyone's kind of shaping this in their own way, which is really interesting to be a part of. And something that really blew my mind last year when I was at the World Economic Forum in Dubai was the United Arab Emirates, and the First Peoples from those communities and how far they have pushed technology boundaries. They were talking about space, which is great. Like, there's a lot of opportunities to weave all our knowledges in to create incredible futures.
Okay, are there any areas that you think we're sort of doing well in or batting above our average in?
Yeah, I think, well, I'm probably biased in this, Daniel, because I descend from the oldest living cultures on Earth, but like, we're phenomenal engineers, like the first engineers. So engineering is something that's always been very important to our people, and caring for country as part of that engineering mindset. Like, we've got the world's oldest fish traps, and we've got the world's oldest built structures. Like, the Jawoyn community in Katherine has the world's oldest built structure. Like, that's phenomenal. But the caring for country movement in Australia is resonating around the world, and other First Peoples are looking to Australia about how First Peoples are managing our lands, particularly in the context of climate change.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So take us through some of the operational challenges you experienced in trying to build a startup from a remote community, and how you were able to tackle those.
Yeah, I think most things have become frustrating in a remote community. Connectivity was a huge challenge, so we had to work out, like, how do we even do this without connectivity? So it involved a lot of using SD cards and USB sticks and like all the old school kind of technologies to try and move data around the place, and then like learning to fly a drone. That's not very easy to do when you have never seen a drone before. So I think just picking up, like, becoming an excellent Google stalker was a skill that I really had to develop in a remote community, because, like, internet, when you have it in town, and it's in the library and it's in some of the art centres, so there are communal internet places that you can go to access the World Wide Web. Using those spaces to find out what's on the horizon, who are the best people working in these sectors at the moment, joining LinkedIn, reaching out to people, telling your story, and trying to, like, I did a lot of mail order stuff with technology. So I was like mail ordering beacons, and I mail ordered drones and different technologies just to try them. I remember mail ordering my first virtual reality headset, and like how exciting that was in the community, because I was seeing it for the first time. The community was seeing it for the first time. Yeah, it was a really great experience to have. But just breaking things, like, there's a lot of things in remote communities, and particularly in tropical remote communities with tech, that go wrong, which probably aren't faced by people in the city. So things like ants crawling into your devices and ruining it, things like humidity and mold, like these are extra challenges that you need to kind of overcome in a remote community. Yeah.
Thank you. And so moving to, I suppose, having your product built and that being built offshore with your developers and your engineers, you now have that onshore, obviously with your collaborations with Telstra and Microsoft. Can you take us through that, and also some of those areas that you touched on where nations like New Zealand around data governance and data sovereignty seem to be leaders from your experiences, why you've done that?
Yeah, why have I moved onshore? I always wanted to build onshore. It wasn't that I didn't want to build here. It's like, it was really difficult for me operating in a rural and remote community to find skills and capability. And, you know, obviously budget has a lot to do with what you can afford to do in Australia versus offshore. So we did do our MVP work there. I actually went to India twice to build with the team over there. So it wasn't like I was doing a remote control thing from Kakadu. I actually went over to the country and worked over there. But I really wanted to shape it in a new direction here, and have it built onshore, and try and upskill other people on that journey as well, because I realised probably 3 years ago that I can't and shouldn't be the only person working in this kind of technology, and it was my responsibility as a woman who's like getting older now to make sure that there's a new generation of people that are equipped to do this kind of work. So working in Australia on building the platform and building the application and all the things that go around to support those two things became important to me, so we could upskill other people in doing this work.
Thank you, Michaela. And you've bootstrapped the whole way. Take us through that. Obviously, big risk involved, but global mindset. You thought globally from day one. Where are those future areas of growth and opportunity for you?
Yeah. So in Australia, first and foremost, we're working out how to scale here properly. So I've just employed 3 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander team members from around Australia. They all live in rural and remote communities, so we're trying to walk the talk. But we have a lot of strong networks in New Zealand, Canada. Really good friends with someone over in Oman who's from the First Peoples over there, who's really interested in this. Yeah, we get a lot of requests from countries overseas at the moment to come and work there, but it's, we're just scaling here. So I'm trying to think about, let's do it here properly and then move offshore.
Thank you. No, very brave and well done. In terms of investment raising, what's important to you as a founder?
Yeah, so investment raising, in 2013 and 2014, when we were trying to get our MVP off the ground, I thought, okay, the only way we can do this is get external investment. And I tried really hard to do that and I just couldn't. So it was probably about 18 months of failing to get investment, which worked out to be fine because I realized that why should I go and ask other people for investment in what I want to do if I'm not prepared to invest my own money in it? So I started investing my own money in it. As I mentioned before, I got a bank loan, and that I failed with my own money, which I'm really comfortable about. And I know deeply how important it is to manage money properly, because it really hurts when you build something that you then have to turn off because it doesn't meet your requirements or your needs, or it doesn't have scalability, or you can't put it together with a market that's going to buy it. So I'm really responsible with money now, and I'm glad that I made those mistakes with my own money. But yeah, for an investment partner, they would have to be really strongly aligned with our values, and it would be a cautious yes to investment, but I don't need to run out and put my cap out and ask for just any money now. So I think that puts us in a really strong position to work with people that are really values aligned with us and will help us grow the business because they believe in what we're doing. Money is really important, obviously, in a tech startup and scale up, but purpose is more important to us, and impact. So that's really our key metrics are focused on purpose and impact before the money.
Hey, thank you. And you've taken us through some of the sort of those lessons that you had, and some of them were quite tough. What's your advice to founders who have that idea, who may not necessarily have the skills, or that may be technically inclined with deep technology skills? What would be your key bits of advice that you haven't already shared, or nuggets of gold?
Yeah, nuggets of gold. There's no right way is my first piece of advice. If you're thinking about doing something, there's no right way to do that, and there's no wrong way to do it either. It'll be what it is. Reach out to other people early. Talk about your idea all the time. Even when people tell you that it's the wrong idea, if you really believe in it, just keep talking about it, because there will be someone in your network eventually that's like, that's great, that's brilliant. Like, I have people saying now, oh, this is such an obvious idea. Like, why didn't we think about it before? So, and try and get to that MVP as soon as you can, because if you're dealing in like a conceptual technology or something like AR and mixed reality, it's really hard to explain to people. Once they see it, it's a lot easier to open that conversation about what they can do to help you. And something that the SheEO network has taught me is make sure that you have an ask and make sure that you have a give in every conversation.
Thank you. So look, you're also a biologist, and you're completely self-taught in STEM. What made you decide to get into STEM, and how did you re-skill yourself through self-teaching?
Yeah, so I have these foundational memories of being at my great-grandfather's house, who was a Dharug man, and my great uncle, like, making satellites and computers, and like, this was in the early 80s. And I asked him recently, like, what were all those things that you were building? And he told me he built his first computer from scratch in 1970. So our family has a strong connection to computers, and my great aunt, Auntie Judith, who is like a cultural aunt but also a blood aunt, has been running the Parramatta Computer Pals Club for over 55s for quite some time. She's like in her late 80s now, and she still teaches. So I guess we've always had that really strong interest and capability in tech. It kind of came a little easy for me to learn, and I'm just curious. I saw that machines have machines can do things to support us in what we want to achieve, and I became super curious about that. And I back in school, I actually wanted to do computer science, but I remember dropping out in year 9 because I was the only girl in the class, and I didn't see anyone like me in the class. So I was like, I don't really belong here, and I dropped out, and that's my biggest regret. And I keep telling my daughters, don't drop out of computer science, because this will be the key to your future if you can continue with it. Yeah.
And that's a good lead into the next question. The 2020 Australia STEM Workforce Report was released last week and highlighted that only 0.5% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have a STEM qualification. How can we ensure that all Australians are best prepared for the future of work, including those groups?
Yeah, so I guess being able to have the opportunity to have a computer is something that would be essential in that pathway. There's still a lot of people in Australia that don't have computers. So it's really difficult to even imagine a future that involves a computer if you can't even turn one on. So I think we need to do more as a nation to support people to have access to this technology. Like, it's a human right, and people need access to the devices. Education pathways. We work with a lot of teachers now, and it's heartening to work with the volume of teachers that are committed to teaching technology, but there's an entire cohort of people that aren't skilled up enough to be able to train the young generation in computing science. And I can see their pain points, because if you didn't grow up or you weren't educated yourself in computing science, and you've got this entire generation of digital natives who you're trying to teach, and they know more about the computers than you do, like, how intimidating and horrible. So putting investment into teaching teachers in a way that's non-confrontational and actually empowers them to have not just capacity, but so they feel, what am I trying to say here? They feel supported in teaching, that is important, I think. And when we talk about such low numbers in STEM for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, it really, it gets me in the heart, because if we counted Indigenous science and Indigenous STEM in that statistic, it would be way higher. We're only counting people that go through the tertiary education system in STEM. Like, we're the world's oldest scientists. There's hundreds of Indigenous scientists. They're just not being counted in these formal reports.
Thank you. Look, you are walking the talk in terms of your entire team at Indigital comprises a talent that is Indigenous from regional Australia. What advice would you give to employers to ensure that equality of access to technology for all Australians and job opportunities can exist irrespective of where they're located?
Yeah, well, it's probably a moot point now, Daniel, because COVID. So I think a lot of employers that maybe struggled with working from home or having staff situated around the country before are probably a little more comfortable with that now. And I think Satya Nadella said himself that the entire globe has shifted in skills. They predicted it would take 2 years for people to reach the skill set that they've reached in 5 months because of COVID. So even COVID's horrible and terrible and awful, but there is a little bit of a silver lining there, in that maybe we're a bit more open-minded as employers about where our staff come from, which opens the door wide open for people to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from their own country.
No, I absolutely agree with that. In terms of finding talent where employers may be looking for Indigenous employees, best advice to those employers watching tonight?
Yeah, so the majority of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are actually in cities and urban regions, like urban and regional areas. But there's talent all over the place. And I guess the way we hire at InDigital is we look for people who are curious and people who want to learn, and people who have good communication skills. The rest of the stuff we can teach people. So I don't think not having a background in tech is a barrier to being in a tech career. I think we can teach all those things. There's plenty of people out there looking for work in the tech sector who want to be skilled up. And I was just having a conversation with a woman from Birdsville yesterday who was saying that her son loves computers and is very talented and gifted in computing, just making apps and things like that. But when they go to the job agency is saying, oh, you have to be a waiter because you're 17 years old and you don't have any work experience. So really shifting the mindset of these job agencies would be a phenomenal step forward for a lot of people that are looking to work in the sector.
I think if you were to look through your entire career and journey, what are some of the big lessons you've learned, and what would you do differently, if anything?
Yeah. Big lessons. Don't quit your day job until your company can support you to eat. Because I did do that first in 2013. I'm like, this is a great idea. I'm going to quit my job and it's going to be great. No, I had to go back to being a park ranger because it didn't take off in the way that I thought it would. The other thing is I would have hired earlier in my company. Like, it took me 7 years to do my first hire, and I only just hired in February. And Jo Baker, who's our COO, is the most phenomenal human, and none of this stuff could have happened this year without her brain in the company. And now I'm on like this hiring frenzy because I can see the benefits of having other people in the company being able to really shape it and grow it and take it in different directions. So yeah, I would probably have hired earlier.
Hey, thank you. Great advice. If you were to champion one policy priority in the tech space at the moment, and we're advising government, what would it be?
In the tech space, definitely investment in education, and let's look at the curriculum, because there's not a lot of cutting edge stuff being talked about in the curriculum at the moment. Like, we talk about digital, but I don't see anyone really talking about artificial intelligence in schools that much. Like, it's pretty niche at the moment. Linda McIver is doing an amazing job with her company trying to get digital skills in terms of data science and growing the field of data science in Australia. So yeah, more support for companies like Linda's would be incredible. Yeah, and as I mentioned before, like this whole cohort of people that enjoy teaching young people and enjoy teaching adults should be invested in themselves. Like, give the teachers the time out to have the opportunity to learn so they can be better teachers in computer science.
So you mentioned a couple of areas there, like artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Why those areas? What are you seeing globally that excites you?
There's things that excite me, like kind of scare me as well, because I don't know. I think probably the thing that scares me most is that there's not a huge amount of women and not a huge amount of First Peoples or people from diverse backgrounds in careers like AI and machine learning. So I do worry about the kind of outputs or the conditions that we're going to create when these technologies scale. And as they scale, they're scaling now. I'm shouldn't talk about it in the future, it's happening now. But something that's really exciting is that we do have people who are really interested in these technologies from diverse backgrounds who are trying to champion more inclusion and are being heard now. So I think that's pretty exciting. And I'm so excited for the opportunity for women like me to get involved in the sector and have opportunities like being able to do a Master of Applied Cybernetics. Like, I really value that opportunity to educate myself and understand and play a role in, just graduating would be great, to show other people that they can do this as well.
Thanks. And final one from me, Michaela, tonight. What does the future in digital look like? What's the goal and what's the aim over the next few years?
Yeah, so we're aiming to work with 885 schools in Australia and reach 26,000 kids with our digital skills program. So that's a 3-year goal for us, and also expand into Canada, the US, and New Zealand. So we firmly have our sights set on those countries because we have fantastic relationships with the communities in those countries already, but there's a lot of similarities. And when we're building the product, actually, we brought a woman from the Diné Navajo and a woman from the Tlingit Nation in the Yukon to come and work with us to trial that, to make sure that we could apply it to communities overseas and that the context was right. And yes, I think, working with lots of First Peoples, like there's 400 million First Peoples in the world that don't have access to a digital future at the moment, and I really want to work hard to change that.
No, well, thank you very much for going through all of our questions. Our audience have submitted a number of questions that I'd like to run past you, and we'll kick off with the first one. You've been very active around education in Australia. What would you change to the Australian curriculum in order to promote ICT careers today?
Yeah, probably as I mentioned before, including more of the cutting edge technologies in digital skills. Like, coding is great, but kids aren't excited by coding, and it sometimes is confronting for teachers to look at a curriculum that says coding, and coding is a thing that's not up everyone's street. So maybe framing it around something that is like what we've done within digital schools, where we do digital skills, but we don't say now we're going to learn Python. We get kids playing in Minecraft and in MakeCode and getting them to create spawning hairy men or dooligas in the environment that they have to listen about cultural law, they have to listen about cultural language, and they have to code that stuff in MakeCode. So yeah, making it a bit more fun, I think would be great.
No, thank you. Next one, what was your biggest lesson you learned when creating your MVP before launching your product?
Don't assume it's going to be published on the App Store is one thing. So, we had a few struggles getting our MVP up on the App Store. Probably, I don't know, there's lots of lessons in building an MVP. It's going to cost more than what you think, and it's going to take longer. I think that's fairly standard. I think most founders would say that it's not an issue or a challenge that's particular to in digital. I think they're probably 2 things to factor in when you're on this journey.
Over or under 10 or 20% or more?
What's that, sorry?
So it's always going to cost you more, you said?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, yeah. Over doubling. Maybe doubling. Especially if you're working in something that's very new. Like, probably if you're working in machine learning and AI at the moment, like, I think that's going to cost you more than what you think it is. Yeah.
What major disruptions in the tech industry do you think you will face in your business over the next 5 years? How are you preparing for these?
I think there's a lot of disruptions that are happening. I think there's going to be a lot of unemployment over the next little while, and there's going to be a lot of people that had great jobs in tech that maybe don't have jobs now, but that creates opportunity for reskilling. I think reskilling is going to be a huge disruption and an opportunity. So we're trying to shape that reskilling by the work that we're doing. I think also, sustainability and the cost of technology is going to come to the fore of people's minds. So something that I've been thinking a lot about lately is, we work in devices like HoloLens and other like drones, and all those things rely on rare earth minerals to be made, and those rare earth minerals are extracted primarily from Indigenous lands, and there is a lot of environmental impact that happens with that extraction. There's a lot of cultural impact that happens with the extraction. So thinking more holistically about not as a tech product that you hold in your hand, but starting to think more about where is the material coming from that's building these technologies, where is the energy coming from that's and that's powering these technologies, and what are we doing at the end of life of these technologies, so we're not impacting communities and environments. So I'm thinking about those things. I love what Yasmin's doing with the world's greatest garage sale, because she's also thinking about those things and looking at what are the business models around those things that will help maybe shift the dial on how we treat those impacts now. And then looking at the opportunities for First Peoples along that the life cycle of technologies as well. So, I really applaud communities in Canada that are creating solar farms to generate enough power to run data centres. It's a huge business opportunity. So, yeah.
No, thank you. Comprehensive answer, and shout out to Yaz, Profit for Purpose business as well, up there in Brisbane. Have you ever had or experienced disagreements with the tech team while building your product? How did you overcome them?
Yeah, all the time. I think working with an offshore development company was really challenging for me. There was obviously cultural challenges with that. There was language barriers. The whole context in the way that you view the world, and when you're dreaming up something and you're trying to explain it to someone who's from a different cultural background, that can be a challenge. So we ended up with things that we wanted. We ended up with things that didn't work, and that was part of the expense part of it, was me learning how to communicate properly with development teams, because I didn't have a tech background, but also me learning how to communicate correctly with people from different cultural backgrounds. Was two challenges that we faced there. Disagreements, I guess I'm more clear, that's terrible English. I'm clearer about what I want for the company, and we have great structures and processes in place now to support decision making in the company. So very clear about what we're trying to achieve. We're very clear about our 3-year goals. We're very clear about our 1-year goals, and we're very clear about our quarterly goals and what our metrics are in the company. And I didn't start off with those things. That we needed more and more structure as we got bigger and secured more investment and resources. So, I think they help us work through challenges in the company. We're also a very culturally safe space to work. So we work with our staff and make sure that we're very clear about, we support cultural responsibility leave, for example, and we support you to have interests outside the company, because when you're an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person, you're not just your job description, you have a universe of responsibilities that you have to attend to as well. So yeah, we definitely support that in our company as well, which I think helps us navigate challenging issues, because we respect our staff and what they have going on in their personal lives too. So yeah.
Thanks. What tips would you give to teams working in AI to fetch results without getting lost in the infinite new trends that are coming through?
I'm a really bad person to ask about this, because I do like shiny new technologies and seeing what they can do. I kind of consider myself a little guinea pig in that. I get a kick out of exploring new concepts and new ways to use different technologies, and mashing them up and seeing what's possible. My team actually keep me really grounded in making sure that I don't go down too many rabbit holes at once. So I think having your team to support you in making you grounded in the project, having specific capabilities for the project. So I know AI is huge. I've just really appreciated being able to go through last semester and think deeply about AI and think about what happens when we take this stuff to scale, which gets me back to the responsibility piece about social licensing in communities. So yeah, I think it's important to have a balance of being able to do the exploration, being able to do the deep thinking and ask the hard questions, and having people around you that can provide you that support and grounding about what you're actually trying to do.
Thank you. Our next question, what advice would you give to our older members and viewers watching this evening in supporting a new digital future of inclusion?
Our older members, like, do you mean demographically older or older members that have been with the ACS for a really long time?
Let's go with the first one.
Okay, so older people. Actually, I'd like to give respect to the older people in this industry because they've had to forge paths too. And maybe some advice from a younger person coming through is provide space for both perspectives in the industry. So we definitely need our elders and the knowledge and experience and skills that people have developed over an entire lifetime. But we also need to balance that with the space of younger people who, our younger people are growing up in a completely different context. I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm like in the middle of these. So we're like the unheard generation. But yeah, I think having the balance of perspectives, and we do that as well. We always consult with the older members of our community, and we always consult with younger members of our community and kids when we're developing new products and services in the company because, there's things that life experience can teach you that young people haven't had the opportunity to have yet. So they, really excited about developing new things and changing the world. And I love that vibrancy, but there should always be an old head in the team that's cautiously encouraging you to move forward, but making sure that you're not blind to some of the risks and challenges that you may not know about as a younger person who hasn't had life experience.
Great answer, thank you. Other end of the spectrum, what would your advice be for our young professional audience willing and looking to start a career in tech? What would you look for when you look to hire somebody in your own startup?
Yeah, I think I mentioned that before. Curiosity is really a great asset to have. Being curious and being willing to try new things. Young people, I'd encourage them to see the possibility in their lifetime. So when we're building things in our company, we've got this golden number, which is 2170. So that is the year that my 7th generation descendant will be walking this planet and caring for country and caring for language and caring for law. So everything that we do today is going to be looked back on by that generation of people. And even though you might be a young person now, you're going to be an old person one day. And what would it take for you to be a great ancestor to those people in 2170? So we all have the opportunity to shape the future, and embracing that opportunity, whether you're 19 or 99, is a quality that I would look for in someone that I would like to hire in my company, because I think we have agency as individuals and as communities to shape the future, and just designing that asking a question like, what would it look like if it was easy and we could build it? Yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but.
Thank you. Next question is it a good idea to outsource the work offshore, and how can you ensure data privacy now on reflection through your own experience?
Yeah, that's a really big challenge. I think, I was probably a little bit blind to that at the start. Not having your team in proximity is challenging. And look, if you've got the skill set overseas that you need and you can't find it domestically, then why would you not work with those people because they're from another country? Being an Aboriginal and Torres Strait, being an Aboriginal woman, I'm going to be the last person that's racist or worried about other cultures, because I know what it's like. So I would never do that to another people's just because they have a different culture and they live somewhere else. If they've got the skills and qualifications, I totally advocate working with people. You need to be clear, though, when you're working with people internationally about what your objectives are and what the outputs are that you expect and how you're going to manage things like security and privacy. That's a big lesson that I learned. So, I think, being clear and thinking about those things in advance and not trying to think about them after the fact.
Thank you. How do you combine both AR and visual media to create your platform?
how do we do it? So we are hosted on Azure, and we use AI basically to integrate the different asset types into one holistic augmented reality experience. So we create characters in 3 dimensions, and then we create landscapes in 3 dimensions. Then we got audio recordings, and the platform uses AI to stitch those together in a way that makes sense contextually. So some of the challenges that were involved in having to be overcome with that is like scaling. So if you have a landscape, 3-dimensional landscape design, which is fantastic, but your character design is like this tiny and not placed within the context of that, there's like a really poor outcome. So that was some of the things that we had to overcome with developing the platform. But yeah, what we do is very simple, and we wanted to keep it simple because we're working with kids and we're working with little kids. So we work with primary school from years 5, and then we work through all the way through to year 12. And the curriculum gets more complicated, and we use different platforms along the way as kids grow up and need experience in things like Blender and other more complicated platforms. But yeah, we wanted, I guess the philosophy behind what we were doing is like, you don't need to be a mechanic to drive a car. So do you need to be a coder to create storytelling, of which the purpose is to translate into intergenerational knowledge and language and law? So that was the kind of question framing that we did around building the platform.
Thank you. Next question is, you mentioned Python. Do you envisage your company going down the path of data analytics, artificial intelligence, and combining it with augmented reality and maybe virtual reality? I think you sort of touched on that in the last one. But,
yes.
Where are your next developments, if you were to summarise that question?
So what's my big dream now? My actual dreaming of where this is going is that we're making digital copies, replicas, twins, I don't know what you call them yet, of our elders in our communities, and we're embedding those holograms with the capability to teach our young people our languages. And eventually, imagine we didn't have to speak English. Imagine I could just speak Darug, and I could teach Darug to my children, and we could, and I guess people are like, why are you obsessed with the language? Learning your Indigenous language as an adult is incredibly difficult. Like, my kids pick it up very much quicker than I do. But as I'm learning my language, I am understanding that there are things that can't be described in English that are described within our language systems. And my people are Cabrogal people, and that means people of the Cobra Grub. And that means if I go to the place of my people and I'm not seeing the Cobra Grub in the water, that means there's a massive environmental issue happening there. Parramatta means the place in the water where the eels lay. Cabramatta, the place in the water where the Cobra Grubs are. Like, our language teaches us about country and about what is supposed to be there. So if we lose our languages, we're losing a whole part of scientific knowledge about what the Australian environment is supposed to be and what's supposed to interact within that.
Thank you. And the final question tonight is, what's the biggest lesson you learned through your journey in digital that changed you as a person?
The responsibility that comes with creating something new. And yeah, I think that's a huge lesson. Like I mentioned before, we all have agency to shape the future. And you know, I created a monster and I couldn't contain that monster. So that really made me sit back and go, what is my responsibility for giving life to this way of expressing our culture? And how do I manage that? And how do I manage that respectfully and with self-determination and with benefit sharing and with attribution and all the important things that we need to think about? How do we do this also with authenticity?
Well, thank you very much for your time this evening, Michaela. Greatly appreciate it. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
And thank you to our audience and ACS members for joining us this evening for our last Industry Insights Leaders series for a few weeks as we take a short break to pause. But thank you once again for supporting the series, and we look forward to announcing our speakers into the future. Enjoy the evening.